Repeated injustice in the legal system creates a spirit of apathy that causes you to tolerate what God does not have his hand on. That at some point, you've got to get a spirit of David that says, I've got to address what is not of the Lord.
In this summer season of Hour of Power, we began our journey into a sermonic series of studies called Survival Mode, realizing that there are some seasons in life when you have so much going on, so many struggles, so many issues to deal with, that you can literally reach a place where the only agenda of your life is to make it to the next stage in the next season. You know you've entered survival mode when your prayerful petitions transition from Lord, give me this, to simply Lord, see me through. And in this survival mode, we've looked at some folk who know what it's like just to try to hold on until the Lord breaks through. We looked at David in the beginning and his battle with the Philistines and the need to have a stronghold. Last weekend, if you are a Sunday worshiper, you missed it on Saturday evening. We looked at the woman with the issue of blood and what it means to reach out for hope and help in Jesus Christ. Last Sunday, in part of this series, the Lord, through the George Zimmerman verdict, changed the sermon, and we dealt with Simon of Cyrene and what it means to bear the cross when the verdict hurts. To put a bow on this sermonic series, I would that we come back full circle to the life of David in one of the most beloved and well-known events in all of Scripture. Today, I want to invite you to rehear and re-examine a story that's beloved by children but also speaks volumes to adults. It is the issue and the event of David's battle with Goliath in the valley of Elah. Some of you Sunday school folk know that that's found in the Old Testament, in the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 17. And I invite you to turn there. You'll find the entire event that go down between David and Goliath in all 58 verses of 1 Samuel 17. But for the sake of preaching, I want to begin our journey in verse number 32, relying upon some basic familiarity with the events that are recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 17. The 32nd verse of 1 Samuel 17 in the New King James Version as we begin our journey. Then David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he's a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when that lion or that bear rose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck it and killed it. Right. Your servant has killed both lion and bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Right. Moreover, David said, the Lord, who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. So Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put a bronze helmet on his head, and he also clothed him with a coat of mail. David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, put them in a shepherd's bag in a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to David. The man bore the shield and went before him, and when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good-looking. So the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Yeah. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin. But brother, I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. You may be seated in the presence of God. I know that many of us are intimately familiar with the story of David and Goliath. We've heard it since we were children in Sunday school. For the sake of preaching, allow me to give you some Cliff Note context. The year is 1063 BC, thereabout. Israel, under the leadership of King Saul, finds itself at war with the Philistines. The war is over the promised land which God has granted them. The Philistines believe that that land rightfully belongs to them. So they find themselves set up for a battle. Bible teaches the Philistines are on one mountaintop, Israel is on the other. And in between these mountaintops is a valley called Elah, where it's all going down. They've set themselves up in proper military array, strategically stationed to engage in battle as usual. The Philistines, however, have a WMD on their side. For those that forget the Bush era, a weapon of mass destruction. And his name is Goliath. The biblical record is that he stands at 6 cubits in the span, which means that he's towering somewhere around 9 feet tall. This brother Goliath has a different plan than battle as usual. So he goes down in the valley and he looks up at the children of Israel and he makes a challenge that goes a little something like this. He says there's no need for us to do battle as usual. No need for thousands of people to die in the valley of Elah and blood be shed. He said, I got an idea. It goes a little something like this. Pick one man to come down and battle with me, and he and I will fight one-on-one. If he beats me, then the Philistines will serve the Israelites. But if I beat him, then Israel will become servants of the Philistines. No need for everybody to go to battle. Just send me one man. The Bible says when that challenge goes out, nobody takes it up. For everybody is afraid to fight Goliath. Israel finds themselves in survival mode because if nobody goes to battle with Goliath, then the fate of Israel is uncertain. The destiny of the land is unsure. Somebody has to show up and fight the giant. Those who've been to Sunday school know how it goes down. Little David is playing delivery boy one day. His dad has sent him down to the battle to bring lunch to his 3 older brothers who are engaged in Israel's army. David comes down, and when he shows up, Goliath steps out and makes the challenge, watch this, saints, for the 41st time. For 40 times prior to this, Goliath has stood in that valley for 40 consecutive days, making the challenge to Israel, and nobody takes him up. 40 days in a row, he shows up at the same time, in the same place, making the same challenge. I want to make sure you get this. 40 times in a row, Goliath shows up in the valley and says, somebody come and do battle with me. For 40 consecutive days, he shows up to make the same challenge. I just got to make sure you catch it. How many times does he show up? 40 days making the same challenge. And when David hears it for the 41st time, he comes to bring a message to the Israelites that I need to press upon y'all. And that is that avoiding him ain't making him go away. You want to ignore it, but every day it shows up. You want to act like it ain't what it is, but every day it's going to show up.
You can close your eyes, plug your ears up, but there are some realities that just keep showing up, and the bottom line is that avoiding it does not make it go away. I don't know who I can preach to, but I hope you get this. Some things don't get better with time. Some things only get better with direct confrontation. There's some things you can't close your eyes to. You can't run and hide. You can't turn your TV off. You can't cancel your subscription to the Washington Post and think that it's just going to get better by itself. No, there's some challenges we face that show up every day. And the only way to deal with it is that you got to deal with it. Here is the challenge of these Israelites. They've heard it so much that they've just said that's the way it is, and ain't nobody doing anything. And let me tell you, my brothers and my sisters, that if you don't address some things, you will find yourself tolerating some things that God has called you to confront. Oh, I'm coming down now. Hear me clearly, and I want you to tweet this right. That repeated offenses that are not addressed create a spirit of apathy that'll cause you to tolerate something that's not of the Lord. Let me say that again. Repeated offenses that are not addressed will create a spirit of apathy that will cause you to tolerate something that's not of the Lord. Repeated injustice that is not addressed creates a spirit of apathy that causes you to tolerate what God is not in. Repeated black young men being killed that you never address creates a spirit of apathy that causes you to tolerate what God is not involved in. Repeated injustice in the legal system creates a spirit of apathy that causes you to tolerate what God does not have his hand on. That at some point you've got to get a spirit of David that says, I've got to address what is not of the Lord. Can I just teach Bible? Watch what happens. Goliath makes the challenge 40 times in a row, and Israel does nothing. David hears it one time and decides he's going to do something about it. Israel hears it 40 times and does nothing. David hears it once and says, I've got to do something about it. How many challenges from Goliath do you have to hear before you get a David spirit and say, I've got to do something about it? Hear me. How many times do you have to hear about the innocent loss of life of young folk before you decide you got to do something about it? How often do you have to hear about the mass incarceration of young black and brown brothers before you decide you got to do something? How often do you have to hear about black on black crime before you decide you got to do something? How often do you have to hear about HIV numbers in our community before you decide you got to do something? How often do you have to hear about the homeless problem before you decide you got to do something? How often do you have to hear the challenge of Goliath before you get a David spirit?
You're talking good, sir.
Watch what David says. He said, listen, I didn't even come down here for this. I came to bring y'all lunch. But if you're not going to do something about it, then I will. I'm not even in the army. It's not my job. But I can't hear the challenge and leave it up to somebody else when I realize that once I hear it, there's a godly indignation in me that says I got to go do something about it. That I don't expect it to be handled by 6 women in Sanford, Florida. I'm not leaving it up simply to the NAACP. I'm not letting it rest on what the president says or does not say. I don't expect the school system to do it all by itself. I don't expect elected officials to make a difference. When I see the challenge, there's something inside of me that says, even if it ain't my job, I got to do something about it. Alfred Street, I cannot pastor a church filled with Israelites who hear the challenge and say, I ain't got nothing to do about it. I need some David folk who, when they see what's going on, something rises up inside of them and says, I cannot keep quiet. I cannot sit still. I can't let it go down like that. I have to do something. Would you nudge your neighbor, just ask him, is there any David in you? That says, I got to do something. If it's just march, I'm going to do it. If it's right to my congressperson, I'm going to do it. If it means I just got to start mentoring a young brother, a young sister, I'm going to do it. If I got to create a prayer line for my coworkers before we get to the job, I'm going to do it. But there's something I've got to do because I can't hear this challenge and just sit still. David hears this challenge from Goliath and watch as he decides, I'm going to go down to the valley and fight. Odds are against me. He's taller, bigger, stronger. Looks like there's no way. But I'm going to go down. I know it's been like this for a long time, but I'm going down. Because this has to be addressed. So he goes down, and you all know how the story turns out. David wins a battle. I want you to take note as you read through 1 Samuel 17 when you get home of 3 things that equip David for victory when the odds are against him. 3 things that empower him to find victory when he's in survival mode. Number 1, David is able to win because he has a vision of victory. He's got a vision of victory. When Goliath steps out and makes his challenge for the 41st time and David hears it, I want you to pay note that there are, Judy, 2 different responses. On the one hand, there are the men of Israel who are afraid of Goliath. But when you get to around verse 25, you'll see that when David hears the challenge, he asks this question. Watch it. David asks, what do I get when I beat him? Okay, you missed this early. The men of Israel are afraid. David says, what do I get when I beat him? You all see the problem, but I'm thinking about the prize on the other side. You're looking at the struggle, but I'm looking at the success on the other side. You're looking at what you got to go through. I'm thinking about what I get when I finish going through it. That one of the things that equips David is that he has a vision of what he will receive on the other side. And the accusation against Israel is the reason you're losing is because you have a defeated mindset. That your thinking is limiting your victory. All you're thinking about is how big he is, how many folk he's killed, how rough the battle will be, what you may lose. But in order to survive in survival mode, you've got to have some vision of life on the other side. You've got to know that this won't last forever. You've got to believe that God can work this for your good. You've got to see the Lord strengthening you on the other side. You've got to have a vision of yourself on the other side. Somebody say on the other side. On the other side, you got to see yourself stronger. On the other side, you've got to see yourself wiser. On the other side, you've got to see a more just society. On the other side, you've got to see a better life for your children. On the other side, you've got to see yourself standing strong and tall. You've got to have vision of victory on the other side. And what limits so many people in survival mode is that you're still walking by sight and not by faith. Believing that when God gets through with me in this, there's a prize. He's got a vision of victory. Number two, and to drop it on you before we go to Sunday school, he has a motivating memory. He's got a motivating memory. Y'all, here's the question. David, at this juncture, is not even 17 years old. In young people language, he's 16 going on 17. And these are men in Israel, 20, 30, 40 years old. Now, how in the world do 40-year-old men send a 16-year-old to battle for them? Come. How does a king allow a 16-year-old to go fight a 9-foot-tall warrior? Somebody call Child Protective Services. Because this is out of order. Why is Saul persuaded to let David go into battle? It's because of what David tells Saul. And listen, I know I'm 16, but let me tell you something. I've been a shepherd all my life. And one day, a lion and a bear showed up to snatch my father's sheep. And I said, oh no. And I went after that lion and that bear. I saved the sheep. And when the lion and the bear turned on me, I grabbed it by the beard and struck it and killed it. David tells Saul, this ain't the first time I've had to go to battle. This isn't the first time I've had to strike something. What I want to tell somebody in survival mode today, I know you don't want me to put all your business out there, but this ain't the first time you've had to go to battle. This ain't the first time you've been talked about. This ain't the first time you had more month than money. This ain't the first time you've had to look sickness in the eye. And David puts Saul in reminder that I've been through this before. And every now and then when you're in survival mode, you got to catch some deja vu and look back over some things you've already walked through, some things you've already come through, and remind yourself that I've been here before. Can I push it real quick? But what empowers David is not that he says, I've done this before, but that he comes to a conclusion that says this: the same God who did it for me then is the same God who will bring me through it now. It's not just that I battled a lion and a bear, but when I look back at that battle, I know that if it had not been for the Lord on my side, that I would have died then. But because God brought me through that, I've just got enough faith today that the same God that did it yesterday is the God who will do it today. And he's motivated by a memory of what the Lord has done. Not what he did, but what God did for him. He says, listen, I'm going to go down here because I got a vision of victory. I'm going to go down here because I've got a motivating memory. But thirdly, watch this will get you. He says, I'm going because I have some anointed armor. When you go home and read 1 Samuel 17, I want you to pay attention to how much detail is given to the armor that's used in this battle. In verses 5 and 6, there is great detail about the armor that Goliath wears. And when David decides to go down in the battle, Saul tries to be helpful. And Saul puts his own armor on David.
And David tries to walk, but he can't because the armor don't fit. And David takes it off because he says, I can't go to battle with Goliath looking like Goliath. Okay. Come. That I can't look like him and fight him. That I've got to do something different than what Goliath is doing, because if I try to fight it Goliath's way, I'm going to lose. Here it is. When you're in survival mode, you've got to be careful, because you can become so desperate that the devil can convince you by any means necessary that you are justified given your situation to do whatever it takes to get through this battle. And as a result, he will want you to wear the same armor as those who stand against you and fight it at their level. Can I give you this, and I want you to tweet it correctly? You can't fight evil with evil, because evil always has another level of evil to go to. Go say it again, Pastor. You can't outdo evil with evil, because evil always has another level to go to. You can't outlie a liar, because they always got another lie to tell. You can't out-manipulate a manipulator, because they always have another manipulation up their sleeve. You can't outdo ugly with ugly, because ugly always got another ugly that ugly can go to when ugly need to go to ugly. You've got to look different than the ones you're fighting. That's why Paul says the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but are spiritual and mighty in God. Y'all don't read your Bible. To the pulling down of strongholds and everything that exalts itself against the knowledge of Jesus Christ. Y'all need to read your Bibles. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places. Therefore, Paul says, stand your ground with the breastplate of righteousness. Stand your ground with the helmet of salvation. Stand your ground with the shield of faith. Stand your ground in prayer, in love, in forgiveness, in patience. Stand your ground in the things of God. He says, I can't wear this. He says, so Goliath, you coming to me with a javelin and a sword and a shield that you ain't even carrying. Your armor bearer is. But I come to you in the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. And watch, David has so much faith in God that he does two things, and this is where we close. He grabs 5 stones and puts them in his bag. 5 smooth stones. He takes 5. Pop quiz, how many stones David take? 5. Y'all are listening. Everybody get an A+ on your pew. He takes 5 stones. Now, Michelle, the question I have to ask, and this is kind of deep, why does he take 5? Okay. Since I went to seminary, let me give you the answer. He takes 5 in case the first one misses. That if the first don't work, I need some other options. Tell you why that's so important, because when you're in survival mode and you believe that God is on your side, you have a tendency to think that the first rock you throw ought to get the job done. Wow. Right? Teach us. And David says, listen, I'm prepared to go down here with God and miss on my first try. But if I miss, I'm not running back. I'm going to throw another rock. So my faith can endure a failure. tell you that's so deep, because so many people get so sanctified with the Lord that they believe that after the first prayer, it just ought to change. They believe that whatever they speak ought to just come, that whatever they desire just ought to come on the first rock. But David says, I have enough faith in God, and this battle is so big that I'm preparing myself that if the first one don't work, there's something else I can still do. That if I don't get the first job, I'm going to fill out another application. That if the first prayer don't get it, I'm going to pray again. That if civil rights charges aren't filed, I still got something else I'm going to do. That if it doesn't turn out the way I want, I'm not putting all my hope on one rock. That we got some more rocks in this bag, and I'm going to keep throwing them until the giant is hit. I'm going to keep throwing them until I see the justice I desire. I'm going to keep throwing them until our world is different. I'm going to keep throwing them until every brother and every sister has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I'm going to keep throwing rocks until I get the job done. David says, I can endure failure. I got enough faith in God that the first rock don't have to work. And let me tell you what else David does, and this just makes me love Brother David so much. I found out hope. I found out as I was reading this, the reason I like David is because David has some South Side in him. He's from the south side of Bethlehem. Yes, he is. Can I prove it to you? Because when he goes down in the valley, he looks at Goliath and he starts talking trash. I like some trash talking. David gets down in the valley, and let me tell you what he says in the Howard John Wesley translation. He says, G, you picked the wrong brother today. You should never have said what you said, because I come to you in the name of God. And when me and God get finished with you, your head is going home with me. Your cousins are going down, and we shall win, because you messed with the wrong brother today. David talked some sanctified trash. I wish I had some folk here today that believe God so much that in the midst of every struggle, you could talk some sanctified trash. My God is able. My God will make a way. My God will see me through. My God will handle this. Would you just ask your neighbor, do you have some South Side in you? Do you know how to talk some sanctified trash? Hey! When you're in that place of surviving, you need a vision of victory, a motivating memory, and some anointed armor. And the testimony of David is simply this as we close. Goliaths fall. Giants fall. Systems change. You just got to keep throwing rocks until God brings the victory.